Welcome to our virtual cemetery walk in their own words. This program is dedicated to all charter members of the Piatt County Historical and Genealogical Society, and especially to our current president, Kay Gilbreth, who has held many offices and been involved since the conception of our society. We are grateful to all of you. We're also very thankful for all of the efforts put forth by the volunteers in the Monticello Theatre Association, the actors, the stage crew, the Piatt County Museum, volunteers from our own society, and anyone else we forgot to mention. My name is Janet Nevling, and I will be your guide today. Let's take a walk up the hill and begin our tour with John Andrew. Oh, here we are now.
I'm Johnny Andrew. I lied about my age. They took me for 18, which is what I told them. That was on Washington's birthday of 1864. I didn't turn 15 until June 6th. They made me a wagoner for Company C of the 79th Ohio Infantry, for which I was grateful because that meant I could ride on the wagon seat with my rifle and equipment beside me. And the other boys, they had to walk and tote theirs. We was in the 1st Brigade of fighting Joe Hooker's 20th Corps. I caught up with the regiment at the Watauga Valley outside of Chattanooga. We was there in camp, drilling and drilling until General Fruendt started his campaign to take Atlanta in May. We was in 15 battles in that campaign. Mostly I was with the wagons, but I was in line at Peachtree Creek and I caught a rebel bullet right here. The leg's been gimpy ever since. I was in hospital until November 1st, when I rejoined the outfit. I was there when Johnson surrendered and at the Grand Review in Washington. I never knew my daddy. He was dead 4 months when I was born. My people, they was Quakers. They come from North Carolina to Ohio in 1815 to get away from slavery. They settled outside Westboro in Clinton County, Ohio. My grandpa, Henry Andrew, joined with the Center meeting there. My pa was just 4 years old. That's where my daddy, his name was John Andrew too, met my mom, Miss Mary Smith. From the time I was a little boy, all I knew was working on that farm. When I was 10, they hired me out. I was bound to a Quaker farmer there in Clinton County. It was hard work, but they promised me that if I worked hard and done what I was told, I'd get a horse with tack and a new suit of clothes and be free to go as I wished on my 21st birthday. If I had it hard as a bound boy, the slave boys my own age had it the more harder. At least I knew the day on which my time was out. Their time was never out. They could only be free by running away and getting to Canada where no man could own another human being. When the war came over slavery, our meeting left it to each man's conscience whether to join the army and fight the rebellion. My older brother, Thomas, joined the 47th Ohio Infantry and was at Vicksburg. Then he took sick and died in Memphis that November. When we got the word that Thomas was lost, I made up my mind to be a recruit. So I ran away and joined up in February. After the war, I went home to Ohio. My brother William had stayed home to farm with my mother. In 1866, they sold the Westboro farm and bought a place in Champaign County, Illinois, near Ogden. I drove one wagon and William drove the other on the move to Illinois. When they was settled, I made up my mind to strike out on my own. And I walked up the Fort Clark Road, catching a ride when I could on a passing wagon. I had no place in mind, but thought to go where I could find a living. At Muhammad, I heard that Benjamin Harris, a prominent stockman and banker in Champaign County, might need a good hand. He told me that he had no place for me. But his brother-in-law, Noble Porter Heath, was looking for a good hand and gave me directions to his place. And that's how I came to Piatt County. Mr. Heath hired me on, gave me a place to live, and I settled down. I was just 17 years old. Mr. Heath had an older brother, James Clinton Heath, who farmed just down the road from his place. And James Heath had a daughter who was just about my age, Miss Frances Helen Heath. They called her Fanny. I don't know how a boy could be that lucky. Fanny and I were married on October 22nd, 1872. Her father died 2 months the day after her. Fanny's mother was a widow with 5 children and a farm to run. So Almer, Fanny's oldest brother, and I was doing the farming. When Almer and Fanny's younger brother took over the farm, I went into the furniture and undertaking business in Monticello when we moved to town. Mother Jane and Annie and Kitty, Fanny's sisters, moved into town too. Now Fanny's pa had been sheriff and chairman of the county board during the War of the Rebellion. Now Uncle Porter encouraged me, and in 1882 I was elected sheriff on the Democrat ticket. I left office at the end of my term. I ran for mayor of Monticello and was elected 3 times. During my time in public affairs, I joined with the Henry St. Post of the Grand Army of the Republic. At one time or the other, I had every office that the post had. My mother came to live with Fanny and me and helped care for our 3 sons and 2 daughters. Mother died in 1892, and we buried her in the new Monticello Township Cemetery on the hill. 9 years after that, in 1900, I lost my beloved Fanny, and we buried her on the hill next to my mother. I married again to Mrs. Lavina O. Rosser of DeLand, a widow, and on November 7th, in 1907, we went to Chicago to be hitched. In 1913, our new Democrat governor, Dunn, appointed me as the superintendent of the Illinois Soldiers and Sailors Home in Quincy. It was an important post, and many wanted it, but with the strong support of many members of the party, I won the job. I was head of the home for 8 years, until replaced when the other party was elected to the governor's office. My oldest boy, Marion, went south, got married in Louisiana, moved to Houston, Texas, where he was in the newspaper business and died of heart trouble. My son Arthur moved to Bloomington to take a job as a bookkeeper for an insurance company, and his sister Ethel moved with him to keep houseboy. Neither ever married. Ethel died in 1913, and Arthur had stomach surgery, took pneumonia, and then died in 1928. My youngest boy, John, got involved with the amusement business and became treasurer of the Wallace Hagenbeck Circus. That's where he met the famous bareback rare, Dally Julian. They married, and they came to Monticello and moved into my big house on William Street. My girl, Meta, married Dr. Charlie Bumstead, and they lived in Monticello their whole lives. I stayed on in Quincy and became involved in national GAR affairs. I held many offices, and in 1939 I was chosen as the national commander of the Grand Army of the Republic. I was at the home on June 30th, 1940. I suffered a stroke and never regained consciousness. I was 91. The Roy Harris Post of the American Legion furnished my pallbearers and gave me military honors. I had a long life, and I suppose that the happiest times were right here in Monticello. I hope that you all are as proud as I I was to be of service to this grand republic, and for the honors that were given me by my fellow citizens of Monticello, Illinois, and of America. Happy birthday, Monticello.
Let's move on to the Kirby proceeding.
Well, gosh and begorra, Mary, we have visitors.
Well, so we do.
Hello, my name is John Kirby, and this lovely lady is my wife, Mary. I was born in County Limerick, Ireland, on December 8th, 1842, the son of Morris Kirby. Father and I immigrated to America in 1850 after the death of my mother, Elizabeth Tully Kirby. He settled near Urbana, Ohio, later removing to Greenville, Ohio. He died in 1878 and is buried in Greenville. He was a Catholic and a father of 4 children. I was 9 years old when Father and I immigrated to America, and when I was 13, I left home and came west to seek a job. Although I was penniless, I boarded a train, and then the conductor was in the process of removing me from the train when a Mr. and Mrs. McCoy, feeling sorry for me, took me with them to Oakley, Illinois, where they lived. I began calling Mrs. McCoy Aunt Jenny. She lived to be 99 years old. Each year on her birthday, I would give her $1 for every year of her life. While I was with the McCoys, I found employment at $10 a month working for area farmers. When the Civil War began, I enlisted in the 2nd Illinois Cavalry and was appointed carrier on the east side of the Mississippi River from Cairo to Belmont. Then I was dispatched to Bolivar, Tennessee, and engaged in the battle there, in which the colonel and 6 men in our company were killed. Then it was on to the battles of Vicksburg. After the surrender of Vicksburg, we were ordered to the front and followed Johnston to Jackson, Mississippi. We destroyed a railroad along the way. After a 30-day furlough, we went on the Red River expedition, marching from Shreveport to the Rio Grande in Texas. I was mustered out November 22nd, 1865, and honorably discharged January 3rd, 1866, with the commission of 2nd Lieutenant. I returned to Piatt County, bought some land, invested in some young stock, and began making money. I married Mary E. Marquis, and we lived on East Washington Street in Monticello. Then we moved to a farm. I operated 1,120 acres. 400 of those acres belonged to my wife, Mary. We built a home in Goose Creek Township, and I had a partnership with Abram Piatt where we shipped cattle and hogs east. We sold dressed hogs on the Board of Trade and made large sums of money. I joined the Piatt and Hubble Livestock Company, and the money never stopped coming in. Now I will let Mary tell you a few things.
Hello. I was born in Goose Creek Township on August the 2nd, 1845, to Ezra Marquis Sr. and Anne Marie Norris. My parents were among the first of the early settlers coming to this area in 1833. I have 3 brothers and 3 sisters. There was a great deal of merriment at our house on December 19th, 1861. 2 of my sisters and one of my brothers were married that day. Paulina married Frank McMillan. Clarinda married William Conklin Hubbard, and Brother Seymour exchanged vows with Caroline McMillan. I think it must have been a case of the traveling pastor. John and I have 2 daughters. Sadly, our first baby died shortly after birth. Our second daughter, Nellie Mae, lived a long life. On June 21st, 1904, she married William Henry, that's Herbert, William Herbert, England. I would like to talk a bit about my husband, John. I am very proud of him. He is a self-made man and has worked very hard. He came to this land a penniless boy and has now become one of the wealthiest men in Piatt County. Although he lost his Irish brogue some years ago, he has retained the Irishman's love of wit and humor and storytelling. He has served 7 terms as Goose Creek Township representative on the Board of Supervisors. He is a member of the GAR and the Masonic Order. We built our new house on North State Street in 1902. Nell and William lived across the street. John died in 1919, and in his will, he directed that Monticello was to inherit $100,000 and our residence at 619 North State Street as a contribution toward a hospital. At the age of 93, I passed away in Long Beach, California. The John and Mary E. Kirby Hospital opened its doors in 1941, and Monticello has had a hospital ever since. Here we are together again,
Yes.
and both of us would like to say,
Happy
birthday.
Monticello.
Try that
Okay,
again.
we'll try that.
Happy 175th birthday, Monticello.
Now, just a bit further up the hill is Anne Consulin.
Afternoon. Are you out looking for the old settlers? Well, you've come to the right place. They are all around here. If you're interested in have a bit, I'll share some of my past with you. I'm Anne Tenbrook Hosselman, daughter of Abram Tenbrook. My grandpa, John Tenbrook, was a colonel in the Revolutionary War. Grandpa was thought to have been a native of Holland. After the war, he moved to Lycoming County, Pennsylvania, and bought timberland and developed it into a farm. My pa married Catherine Piatt back in Somerset, New Jersey, where he had been born. I was born in Lycoming County, February 14, 1806. I believe that is Valentine's Day, making me a true symbol of my parents' love. We stayed in Pennsylvania until 1818 when we removed to Brookville, Indiana. About 3 years after reaching the Indiana frontier, I died. Then in 1832, I married Godfrey Hanselman. We moved to Piatt County in 1839, bringing our 3 sons, William, James, and Abram, with us. We first lived in a double log cabin belonging to Major Houston. We brought 2 daughters into the world there. Godfrey suffered acutely with malaria, and in 1843, he went back to Cincinnati to attend to some business connected to his father's estate in Germany. He stopped for a time at Spencer Wiley's. That's A.G. Wiley's brother, who lived at Brookville, Indiana. Godfrey took sick at Brookville and died and was buried there. It was several months before we were notified of his death. So here I was with the children. We moved to a house on the west side of the public square owned by James Hollingsworth. Next door was a log cabin which had been erected by my brother as a blacksmith shop in 1837. I bought that cabin and moved my family into it. I cut trees and hewed them out and put in joists and sawed and cut holes for the windows and made that a livable place. The cabin was one room, 18 by 22, and it contained a big fireplace with a crane and trammels. It had a rag carpet and 2 tall 4-poster beds, a chest of drawers made in 1821, an old clock, and 2 spinning wheels, one big and one little, each over 75 years old. Among my other treasures was a tiny silver spoon, which had belonged to my Grandpa John. In those days when it was made, there was no letter J, so the spoon is marked with an old-fashioned character to symbolize J. One of my daughters died in that cabin in 1846. When we first came to Monticello, my brother John Tenbrook was in command of the tavern called the Old Fort. To ward off prairie fires, it was necessary to plow the land in front of the Old Fort, which stood on the corner next south of the courthouse. Deer and wolves often ran across town. Most supplies were not available here, and we would have to go to Decatur to purchase most items. It was difficult to make a trip there in the spring and early summer due to the sloughs and the mud. We early settlers had little and had to depend on each other. Often in winter, we ground our own meal. We used an iron wedge for a pestle and a hole in a log for a mortar to make the corn fine enough to be ground in a coffee mill. Hominy was a fashionable dish in those days. I lived a good many years. In 1901, I took sick and gradually faded away. Was 96 years old. Most of my children survived me. The Reverend H.G. Gleiser pronounced the last words over me. I understand my old cabin was torn down in 1920. It was a typical pioneer home, and I was a typical pioneer. So I guess we just had to make room and be replaced by more modern homes and folks like you. My family and I left a lot of history around here. Hope y'all enjoy looking at it. A lot of folks living hereabouts yet are related to us. Thank you for your patience in listening to an old woman's ramblings. And happy birthday, Monticello.
Follow me around the next bend in the road to find Dr. Nelson Gardner Coffin.
I hope you're all feeling well today. I'm Dr. Nelson Coffin. I was born October 3rd in 1820 in Guilford County, North Carolina. When I was 2 years old, my family moved to Indiana, to Vermilion County, near the Illinois state line. My parents are William G. Coffin and Eunice Worth, and I have a brother, Perlis. As a youngster, I always wanted to be a physician, so I enjoyed bandaging the dogs, or the cats, or Perlis. I was fortunate to get a good education. After graduating from my regular school, I attended the Medical College of Ohio at Cincinnati. Following graduation, I began a medical practice in Vermilion County in 1843. I continued with that practice for 5 years. Just before moving to Piatt County, I married Miss Phoebe D. Johnson, and we had 3 children. Our first, Franklin, was born in 1852, and he died when he was just 3 years. Eugene was born in 1853. Our third son, Jonathan, was born in 1857, and he lived only 4 months. My beloved wife, Phoebe, passed away 2 months after that. I could never bring myself to remarry, and I felt that there was nothing to keep me in Monticello any longer. So I placed Eugene with his mother's relatives, who could provide him a fine home. He learned telegraphy and went to work in Kansas City. Then he later studied veterinary medicine, and he studied homeopathy. He graduated from the Durham Medical College in Chicago, and he moved to Los Angeles, where he lived the rest of his life. In those days, the doctors went wherever they were needed. There was a far distance between homes. Regardless of the time of day, the weather, or the distance, we responded to everyone in distress. I never, ever failed to answer a call for help, and it made no difference whether the patient was rich or poor. Sometimes I never got paid at all. Early physicians suffered inconvenience of traveling over almost roadless country, and with swollen streams or swampy ponds, or some places where the prairie grass was so tall it made it difficult to see where you were going. Civil War broke out, and there was a great need for doctors. So I left Monticello in 1862 to become assistant surgeon for the 107th Illinois Regiment. A soldier is at very high risk of being shot, but he was at even greater risk of dying from disease. Twice as many died of disease or infection than from gunshots in that war. Dysentery, measles, smallpox, pneumonia, and malaria were the greatest enemies those soldiers had. Army camps were breeding ground for disease. Conditions were even worse for prisoners. I understand that the Andersonville prison in Georgia was the worst. For those who were injured in the extremities, options were limited. Amputation. During major engagements, the flood of wounded was overwhelming. At that time, we doctors did not understand infections since antibiotics had not yet been invented. There was no attempt to maintain sterility during surgery. Since there were no antibiotics, even minor wounds often became infected and fatal. We used chloroform as an anesthetic to greatly reduce the torture of those procedures. Sometimes medical supplies were few or even non-existent. Surgeons became very proficient at performing amputations, sometimes taking only 10 minutes. Amputated limbs were often piled 5 feet high as doctors and assistants worked around the clock with little or no sleep. We made no attempt to wash our hands or surgical instruments because there wasn't time between patients. Despite the unsanitary conditions, it was estimated that as many as 75% of those amputees did recover. Thankfully, those days are behind us, but never forgotten. And great strides have been made in medicine so that they will never return. We did our best for those brave men. I served until the end of the war. I received an honorable discharge and returned to Monticello, where I took up my medical practice again. I ended my practice in 1874 so that I could devote some of my life to maintaining the 240-acre farm that I had acquired. My life ended November 1st, 1910. My good friend of over 50 years, C.A. Tapman, delivered the eulogy. I always, during my life, looked for the bright side of life. There's no better side of life. There is a better side of life, but many never find Thank you for listening to my story. I'm honored to be part of the 175th anniversary of Monticello.
On to the next grave across the road and a bit into the trees to Harvey Houston.
As you can see from my son, my name is Harvey E. Houston. My father, Thomas Houston, was born near Philadelphia, April 13, 1790. He married Mary Barr and moved to Piatt County, Ohio, about 1810. He bought a tract of ground near the present-size Circleville, that's section 29 on the map. He built a home and cleared the land and brought livestock from New York and Philadelphia, driving them across the mountains. It is here where I was born, January 5th, 1844. We left Ohio when I was 15 in 1859 and moved to Jackson County, Missouri. We farmed there until shortly after the Civil War began. Now, Jackson County is where William Quantrell's band of guerrillas was formed. I knew many of the boys that was joined his band. Jesse James was one of the members. Things got pretty uncomfortable for us there, so we moved to Douglas County, Kansas, near Lawrence. We stayed at Lawrence just a year, managed to get away just in time to miss the massacre. 150 men were murdered there. The abolition town of Lawrence were murdered by the Southern Artesians. Now, the Civil War took a different turn in the Kansas, Missouri area. There wasn't many just regular army, just bands of partisans that went out and attacked the civilians and each other. This dated back to 1854 when the Kansas-Missouri border became the site for tension over slavery. General Thomas Ewing arrested several wives and sisters of this Quantrell band, and he held them in a building in Kansas City, and the building collapsed and killed 5 of them. Well, Quantrell must have been pretty upset, because he gathered his band, 450 men. They kidnapped 10 farmers and forced them to guide them to Lawrence. Then they killed them. After they killed them, they dragged 182 men from their homes and murdered them, burned 185 buildings, then rode back to Missouri with the cavalry in pursuit. After leaving Kansas, we relocated to a little safer area up in Will County, Illinois. That was near Joliet. We sold that 4 years later and moved to Logansport, Indiana. That was 1866. I stayed in Logansport 1 year. In 1867, I crossed the open prairie in Billy Motherpaw's old hack from Piatt to Monticello, where many of my relatives were already living. Now, I had taught school in both Kansas and in Will County. I had quit to help my parents farm in Logansport, but coming to Monticello, I began teaching again and taught for 2 years at the Wildcat School in Willow Branch Township. While I was there, I studied law with Charles Watts, a retired lawyer, and in 1870, I was admitted to the bar. I became a partner with W.E. Lodge, and we opened our firm, Lodge in Houston, attorney, and real estate agents. Our office was on the corner of South Charles and Main, just directly behind the courthouse. We purchased the first typewriter in Monticello. It cost $150, big money back then. I left the partnership in 1886 when I was elected judge. I have served as a school director, secretary of Agriculture Society, attorney for the Lake Fork Drainage District, and I saw that project firmly established. I also credited with the establishment of the Cemetery Association, and I served as secretary. That was 1873. I was Grand Master of the Grand Council of Masonic Fraternity and commissioned Deputy Grand Lecturer by the Grand Lodge of F and A&M of Illinois. Now, I don't want to sound like I'm bragging, but it was my way of saying thanks to the people who had so readily accepted me into their community. My first marriage was to Susie Stickle, daughter of Daniel Stickle. Susie died shortly after giving birth to our daughter, Susie. Baby Susie also died 6 months later. My second marriage was to Martha Ward, daughter of Dr. Christopher Ward, who was deceased. We lived with Martha's widowed mother. Martha bore me a son as Thomas Ward. Thomas Ward Ward went on to become a prominent lawyer in the Chicago area. He married and gave me 2 grandsons, Noyes and Harvey. Another of their sons, Charles, had died young. In 1883, I invented and patented the Telorama, an acoustic telephone which was in use until 1888. We had several salesmen out promoting the use of that, and we had received orders for most every state in the Union. But with the widespread service of the Bell telephone system, the use of the Telorama was discontinued. I've always been a Republican, cast my first vote for General U.S. Grant. My life ended May 4th, 1895 in Chicago, where we had moved to be close to our son and his family. Martha suffered with heart trouble and passed away March 15th, 1906. Since her life was here, our remains returned to the prairie soil we so loved. We were not among the earliest settlers, coming 31 years after Monticello was born, but this is home. Happy birthday, Monticello. We love you.
Now we'll visit James McReynolds, better known as Major McReynolds.
Good afternoon. I'm James McReynolds. My friends call me Major. My father's family originated from Scotland, which they left for Ireland. Not really sure when they got to America. Our surname has a variety of spellings and has changed with each and every move they've made. John Dixon McReynolds was my dad. He was born in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, where he married my mother, Margaret H. not the author. Father died when I was 9 years old. My name is James McReynolds. Like I said, it took 5 years to sell father's estate. Mother then moved to Tennessee, and the family kind of went their own way from there. My brother Joseph moved to Saline County, Missouri. He married and had 13 children. His son Alan was a wealthy land and slave owner, but he was hung by the neck until death by Union troops on Christmas Eve in 1864. He was accused of harboring Quantrill and was raised. Alan's son Joseph became a judge and was a one-time candidate for mayor of Missouri. Governor. My life was relatively calm compared to those in Missouri. I had become a land speculator, coming to this area in the early days. The early settlers called the area Piatt's Point. While a movement was being made toward the formation of Piatt County, James Piatt Sr., Abraham Marquis, William to develop a village. We laid the area out off into town lots, and I purchased many of those lots. In 1839, not satisfied with the progress being made, I called a meeting of the more influential settlers and brought up the question of starting a grist mill, as we had traveled many miles to get our grain to mill. We formed a milling company, calling it the James McReynolds Company, for raking a sand and grist mill. We had $1,700 invested, and shares were $100 each. The mill was located north of town where Goose Creek drains into the Sangamon. It was later known as Collins Mill, and then converted into a combination grist and sawmill known as McIntosh Mill. We finally got around to naming the town. My suggestion for naming it was for the home of President Thomas Jefferson. When I was 71, I moved into the Pearson Motherspaugh Hotel, as my health was failing, and that is where I died in 1862. My estate was admitted to probate. I had very few personal items, and Jacob and Piatt Jacob, Piatt, and Alan McReynolds were named administrators and were required to post a $100,000 bond. I owned several town lots, notes and mortgages totaling $61,500. Also, there were many sheets of paper listing people who owed me money in amounts for between $500 and $5,000. William McReynolds, my nephew, came from Missouri to help settle his estate. He gave up his position as constable to come here. Again, it took him 5 years to settle my estate. William stayed here and became a county surveyor and a county judge. He married and had 6 children. His twin daughters are buried by that big stone. They were born in 1867. Maddie died in 1868. And Betty died in 1873. The twins were one of the first of the burials in the newly formed Monticello Cemetery. William died in 1879 and is buried here also, but he has no stone. I guess I am most remembered as the man who named the town Monticello, meaning hillock or little mountain. But I understand now, in this modern world, we call it Monticello. Stop by again. We'll talk about selling you some lots. Have a good day.
Just northeast of here, you can find Michael Hazard and his family.
What was referred to as a rare event in Monticello early Sunday morning, September 18, 1880, in a small home in the northwest part of town. My wife gave birth to quintuplets. Can you imagine? I became the father of 4 boys and 1 girl on that day. To me, it's still a shock. Altogether, the babies weighed 19 1/2 pounds. 3 of the boys died shortly after birth, and the fourth boy died the following Tuesday, and the girl lived for 23 days. The attending physician, Dr. Moffat, did not even record their births in the Piatt County Clerk's office. My name is Michael Hazard, and my wife is Asenath. We had 11 children in all, but only 4 survived to adulthood: Albert, Edgar, Charles, and Nellie. I was born December 7th, 1841, at Vienna, Scott County, Indiana. I became an orphan when I was 6 years old, and I went to live with relatives. In 1861, I enlisted in Company C, 38 Indiana Infantry Volunteers. I was wounded at the Battle of Perryville, Kentucky. It was the first battle I was in. Asenath Salem Davis and I got married in Little York, Indiana in 1863, and 3 years later we moved to Monticello. Asenath is sister of C.P. Davis, who was a businessman and politician of this county for years. Perhaps you've heard of him. I brought a stock of goods to Monticello when we moved here and opened a mercantile store in partnership with my brother-in-law, C.P. Davis, under the name Davis and Hazard. A few years later, C.P. sold his interests and the firm name was changed to Hazard and Hott. The firm was dissolved in 1888. I was fairly active, having served as city treasurer and alderman. I served on the board of trustees for the Methodist Church, and I helped promote many of the civic improvements. When the Farmers State Bank was organized, I was elected a director. Asenath is a native of Washington County, Indiana. She is a sweet, gentle woman. We bought a house on East Washington Street and lived in it for 45 years. Our 4 surviving children: Mary. Albert married Ines Miller and moved to Oklahoma, where he died in 1915. Edgar married Myrtle Kirkpatrick. He died in Decatur and is buried in Graceland Cemetery. Charles was our longest-lived child. He married Effie Mae Hanline. He was proprietor of the Hazard grocery store on the west side of the square. He began as my assistant and later bought me out. He had a large trade. They eventually moved to California, where he died and is buried. Nellie, our daughter, married William H. Ream, and they also lived in California. In 1916, I suffered a stroke of paralysis and was an invalid until my death, which occurred 3 years later. I was locally noted for my honesty and kind spirit. Our family lived a quiet, simple life. And in 1925, Azimuth joined me here. We are united once again. We were always at peace with God and man.
Feel free to get up and walk around. In our lobby, you'll find some snacks provided by Lucia's Catering, some family trees, museum artifacts from the Piatt County Museum, and a few items for sale. Please register if you have not already done so. Welcome back to our cemetery walk. I hope you had a nice rest. On north, we go to find Little Barry Weaver.
I do. My full name is Little Barry Weaver. However, as you can tell, I'm not little nor Barry, so I go by LB. I was born in Virginia, 60 miles from Richmond along the James River in Fruendt County on April 16, 1813. My folks was born in Virginia too. Pa was the overseer of a big plantation before we got our own farm. When I was 12, we moved to our own farm in Chillicothe, Ross County, Ohio. Pa died 4 years later, and I had to work to help support the family. Ma had 4 boys and 10 girls. I was number 5, so I got no schooling. The year I was born, President Madison had just appointed Thomas Posey, a Virginian, as the new governor of the Indiana Territory. Then Indiana was made the 19th state. And in 1818, Illinois became the 21st state, and its capital was Kaskaskia. The country was opening up. My pa's folks was mostly English. However, my grandma was married, but everyone called her Molly. She was Monacan Indian. All the males of her tribe was killed off by the white settlers. So these Indians lived on 10,000 acres near Richmond in a village called Monticello. She had no last name, and their marriage was never recorded. I got married in 1837, if I remember rightly. Anyway, Sarah Ann Neal. Sarah died in 1860 of dropsy. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Anyways, we got us a place and started having kids. But the West was calling us. There was just too many folks congregating in Ohio, and more land was being advertised, so we decided to heed the call. We hitched up our 4 horses to the wagon, loaded up our goods and our 4 kids, and 'twas westward ho! We landed here in Monticello 16 days later. Right there. We had $3 left of the $16 we started out with, and Doc King here was kind enough to let us move into this small office space. We unloaded, and then we went on to Springfield to see my sister. We had a real nice visit. On the way back, we stopped in Decatur and bought 3 chairs with our last $3. When we got back to Monticello, Ned Hader tried to sell me a quarter of beef. Ned, he had the hotel. Told him I had no money, so he gave me a job hauling. We got that quarter of beef. I took this job chopping and hauling firewood for the hotel, there was dead wood and downed wood everywhere just for the taking. I was paid $16 for that. Can you believe it? I also cut and split 100 fence rails for Dan Stickle and got $3. I used that $3 to buy a pair of boots in Decatur. They're not being done for sale hereabouts. That spring we moved to the farm of John Britton. I know John from back in Ohio. Then in 1846, we moved back into town because John wanted his farm. We soon got tired of town, so we entered the first prairie farm east of town. Judge Ricketts, Esquire Wiley, Jim Houston, and John Britton all helped us raise our cabin. We had us a jug of whiskey with us, and we made James Reaver carry it. You see old Jim, he was a preacher here, so we know we could trust him not to swig on it. Bad weather moved in that day, so we had to go to work. We finished it though the next day, and then we played ball and was swigging from this here jug till it was dry. That was a mighty fine day. There was great flocks of geese, brants, cranes, prairie chickens, and a lot of rattlesnakes out there over the ridge. It was mostly swampland then. Never went hungry though, always good hunting back then. I was a good teamster, and I got plenty of work teaming for Monticello businessmen to places like Pekin and Springfield and Covington. I would take grain along for my horses, and then I would just kind of hide it and leave it in places along the way for my trip back. Pay for my 4 horses, my supper, and my breakfast cost me 37.5 cents. Well, Sarah and me, we had 15 children. 2 babies and a son aged 9 died. They was all good kids. Sept Winfield got himself into a mess. You see, Win married, but his wife took sickness and was an invalid. They hired Emma Sprague to do housework and cooking. The stories got back to us that Win was real mean to his wife and a mite too interested in Emma. Emma was seeing a fellow by the name of Daniel Maher, and that upset Win something fierce. He urged her to let Maher go. But one evening, Maher walked from town with Emma, and they stood for some time talking by Dighton's gate. You see, Emma worked for Dighton then. Win happened to see him too. That night, when Emma was closing up the smoke house for the night, she claimed that Win grabbed her, threatened her with a knife, forced her to go to her room where he hit her and shoved her around. While he was getting out his whiskey flask, Emma got away and ran outside. Mr. Dighton, Will, and Otis Moore heard some commotion and went outside, but they didn't see nothing. Win then caught up with her again, but then let her go, and he left. She supposedly cleaned herself up, changed her clothes, took her Bible, some writing papers, and some wine, and wandered around a bit. She went to the Connard farm where Maher worked, and she gave him a letter. In it, she claimed that she had sinned with Win. Later, Fitz and Tippett found Win face down floating in the river. His throat was cut. Guess we'll never know if somebody killed him or if he did it himself. Well, I like John with y'all. My throat's a bit dry and I need a swig. I hear y'all got a party to attend to anyway. If y'all ever get back to these parts again, stop by.
It is just a short distance to the grave of William Franklin Lodge.
Being behind this podium makes me feel like a preacher, which I'm neither equipped nor interested in being, but I've been told if I move around, I'll be out of the light and deprive you of my lovely countenance. I am William Franklin Lodge. I was born November 12, 1868, to William F. Lodge and the former Francis A. Piatt. I attended and graduated from Monticello High School. After that, I enrolled in the University of Illinois and then joined the law department of Northwestern University, where I graduated in the class of 1892 and was admitted to the bar the same year. Now, upon returning to Monticello, I joined my father's law practice of Lodge, Hicks, and Lodge. But I was always energetic and had a lot of interest. For instance, I set up a tile and brick plant just north of town, and along with C.A. Tapman and James P. Lodge started Monticello Light and Power Company. Now, Monticello Light and Power Company was later acquired by the Illinois Traction System, which you probably know better as the interurban system. Then in the 1920s, it was sold to Illinois Power and Light Company. Dr. A.F. Ward, a Monticello dentist, was one of the very first electrical customers in Monticello. Now, it was common back in those days for a power plant to just operate from dusk until 9 p.m. since the only use for electricity was lighting. And of course, decent folks were in bed by 9. Along with others, I helped start the Monticello Mutual Phone Company, which merged with Piatt Telephone Company. It was a time of great many steps were being made toward modernization. The Isaac Walton League, of which I was president, had its convention one year at our preserve at Bucks Pond. But I was always interested in wildlife and nature preserve, so I was involved in forestry projects, Boy Scouts, Rotary Club. For many years, I was president of this very cemetery association and started the Piatt County Historical Society. So as you can see, I have the good fortune of being involved in many of the worthwhile projects which help prepare and preserve our area for future generations. As a matter of fact, the entire Lodge family was very much involved in supporting worthy causes. Volunteering is the best thing you can do to improve the quality of life of your community. So my advice to you is to get involved. Let me check on the time. Oh, I've used it all up. And I haven't begun to talk about all the things I should have. But perhaps we could do this again sometime. I thank you for your attention and hope you enjoy helping to celebrate 175 years of Monticello. Thank you.
And right next to Mr. Lodge are Daniel and Annabelle Stickle.
Good afternoon. I'm Annabelle A. Piatt Stickle. Piatt County was named for my father's family, several of whom have resided right here. My father was James Andrew Piatt, and he was born in 1789 in Pennsylvania. Sadly, he was just a boy when his father died, and then his mother moved the family to Cincinnati, which was just a village with just a few houses. Directly after the War of 1812, he married Miss Jemima Ford, and they moved to Brookville, Indiana, and he built a flour mill where he floated products down the Whitewater and then on to New Orleans. He continued to flatboat for several years after selling the mill. Now, while living in Elizabethtown, Indiana, he floated 2 boats of live hogs to New Orleans, but there wasn't a market for them there. So he shipped the hogs on to Cuba, and he got a really good price for them there. Then he went on to Lawrenceburg, Indiana, where he kept a hotel. It was in town there where I was born, in May of 1825. Now, I was named for my grandmother, Annabelle Andrews, but I go by Annabelle A. Piatt. Now, soon after my birth, the family moved to Indianapolis, and eventually to Piatt County, arriving here in 1829. Now, my father bought the Hayworth claim in the present town of Monticello. It was only a squatter's claim then, but it gave prior right of entry. Now, there were 2 cabins and 30 acres fenced and platted. in the fall of 1830, or maybe it was 1831, dates slip by me sometimes. My father and Henry Sidoris went on horseback to the Dahlia and made the first regular entries in the land office for their respective counties. Now, if I recall rightly, that was also the year of the deep snow. It caused the Indians to lose nearly all of their horses. The snow wouldn't support the weight of the large animals, and many of the deer were caught by the dogs. And let me tell you, there was venison on the table that winter. We knew many Indians because they often visited my father. He let them keep their fried venison in the garret of our home. My brother, Jacob Piatt, was the first white child born in Monticello. And my father was the county commissioner of Macon County, which at that time included this part of our county. And at a meeting, which was called for the purpose of organizing their counties, two names were voted upon, Webster and Piatt. And few votes were cast, but the majority favored Piatt. The year of 1836 brought the sudden freeze. Much of the livestock froze, and anyone caught out in the open prairie without adequate shelter froze to death. It was miserable for man and beast. And that was the year that we lost my mother also. She left 6 sons: William, John, James, Richard, Noah, and Jacob. I was her only daughter. I attended schools for brief periods, being taught by James Auden and Nicholas DeBoer. I attended 1 term in Decatur and 1 term in Lafayette. Father required all of his children to be able to read before going to school, and he made sure we did our evening studying. In 1837, the village of Monticello was surveyed by Edmonston McClelland of Macon County. The village was laid out and plotted, and lots were sold. So you see, Monticello was born in 1837, making it 175 years old this year. Piatt County was formed in 1841. Anyone living here before then was considered a resident of Macon or DeWitt counties. In December of 1837, Father married Mahala Oxley. They produced 1 child, Mary. She was born in 1839, but Father never got to see her. He became very ill with typhoid pneumonia, and he died in 1838. Mahala died in 1850. Now my husband Daniel will tell our story.
Thank you, dear. My name is Daniel, and I was born in Pennsylvania in 1816. My parents brought me to Decatur, where they both died at an early life, leaving 8 children. My first visit to Monticello was in 1837. Whereas most visitors did, I stopped at the Piatt cabin, and there was Annabelle, getting potatoes from the potato hole under the cabin floor. I married her in that cabin.
After a 5-year courtship, of course.
For a brief time, I taught school, then began clerking at the store of Prather, Adams, and Pecora, later going into partnership with them and opening a general store in Monticello, which made me the first merchant in town. After selling this business, we moved to a farm of 830 acres and remained there until 1865, when we built a brick home on the West Washington Street. Later, we moved to a home on South Market Street. I got to serve a term in the legislature and was postmaster under President Buchanan. In 1872, I got the honor of being elected the first mayor of Monticello, then also served several years as police magistrate. Annabelle and I raised 1 son and 4 daughters. Me and Anna are here along with two of our daughters, Nellie and Mary Ellen. And we are honored to have been part of this celebration.
Happy birthday, Monticello.
Our last grave is on the far eastern side of the cemetery in the Valentine plot. I hope you brought your walking shoes today.
Hello, my name is Catherine Luella Valentine, known by some of my family as Kate, the red-haired school teacher. In tracing the Valentine family, we found an interesting story that I would like to share with you. Barnabas Valentine was born in 1757 in Northern Ireland. His Irish Protestant parents were weavers and bleachers of linen. They lived in the province of Ulster along the Irish coast of the North Channel. One day in 1771, a ship anchored in the harbor. Most of the crew was sick or had died at sea, so the remaining men went ashore looking for replacements. They could find no men, but they lured two young boys aboard to tour the ship. One boy was 12 years old and the other was 14. The 14-year-old was Barnabas Valentine. The boys soon discovered that they were captives on the ship. It sailed for America. The 12-year-old died at sea. When the ship docked in Baltimore, Maryland, Barnabas managed to escape and stayed hidden until the ship left. Barnabas later enlisted to serve in the Revolutionary War. He served in Captain Robert Sample's company of the 10th Pennsylvania Regiment of the Continental Line. He wintered at Valley Forge in 1778 and 79. In 1783, Barnabas married an English girl, Hannah Jane Wade. They lived on a farm that they owned near Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. This farmland now is the site of Bryn Mawr College for girls. Hannah gave birth to a boy, John, in 1794. John lived and died in Allen County, Ohio. He had a son, John Neely Valentine, who was my grandfather. My father, George Washington Valentine, was born in 1848 in Bremen, Fairfield County, Ohio. The family moved to Illinois in 1866, settling near Mansfield, where my father met and later married my mother, Emma Coffin. They lived in Mansfield for 4 years before they moved here to Monticello. They built a one-room house, eventually enlarging it to hold their 12 children. The first child, Leonard, died in 1874 when he was hardly over 1 year of age. I was born in 1896, the youngest of 7 girls and 4 boys. Our home stood on the 20 acres in what is now the wildlife park named Valentine Park, east of the cemetery. That parcel of land was part of a United States land grant to Hiram Heath in 1836. The Heath family sold the land to William E. Lodge in 1839. Lodge sold 5.5 acres to my mother, Emma, in 1879. Imagine a woman purchasing land. Then father bought the remaining 13.5 acres in 1891. Father had a life of hardships, always striving to maintain an unprecedented standard of morals. He patented a gate and a one-man crosscut saw. If he had had some money, he would have been known far and near for his genius. I was educated for 10 years at Guyton School, which was within walking distance just east of our home. Then I graduated from Monticello High School in 1914. I I started my teaching career that same year at the Wildcat School, which was west of Monticello. After 2 years there, I taught from 1916 to 17 at the Camp Creek School. Then I taught at the Dighton School. After a short period at Lincoln School, I taught first grade at Washington School. I taught 50 years at Washington School, 40 of them in the same classroom. I understand now that Mr. Steve Wadley holds class there for fourth graders in the same room. At various times, I attended Normal University from 1915 to 1924 and finally received my bachelor's degree from the University of Illinois in 1950. I understand that many of my students remember me fondly, and I am pleased about that. Well, it turns out that I knew a great deal about education before it was ever tested and proven and decreed by the state. Some of my students still know poems that they memorized over 50 years ago. Some boys, who now mature men, know the satisfaction of mowing my yard and being rewarded with a glass of farm fresh milk. Research today says that one of the most effective tools in teaching is that students sense their teacher cares about them. My students do, and I care about them. For 54 years, I loved my young charges here in Piatt County. I kept the old family place and lived there. I never married. I loved going out to milk my cows and do chores on farm. I deeded a section 90 feet by 360 to the Monticello Cemetery Association. It's known as the Valentine Plot. I hope that some of my students are here today. Thank you for all being so attentive and listening. In 1977, I passed away in Decatur. I had lived a long life of faith and generosity.
Roll call by Nathaniel Graham Shepherd.
Corporal Green.
The orderly cried.
Here.
Was the answer loud and clear.
Silas Drew.
Then a silence fell. This time no answer followed the call. Only his rear man had seen him fall. Killed or wounded he could not tell. There they stood in the failing light, these men of battle, with grave dark looks, as plain to be read as open books, while slowly gathered the shades of night. The fern on the hillsides was splashed with blood, and down in the corn where the poppies grew were redder stains than the poppies knew. And crimson dyed was the river's flood, for the foe had crossed from the other side that day in the face of a murderous fire that swept them down in its terrible ire, and their lifeblood went to color the tide.
Herbert Klein.
At the call there came two stalwart soldiers into the line, bearing between them this Herbert Klein, wounded and bleeding, to answer his name.
Ezra Kerr.
And a voice answered,
Here. Hiram Kerr.
but no man replied. They were brothers, these two. The sad wind sighed and a shudder crept through the cornfield near.
Ephraim Dean.
Then a soldier spoke.
Dean carried our regiment's colors. When our ensign was shot, I left him dead. Just after the enemy wavered and broke. Close to the roadside his body lies. I paused a moment and gave him a drink. He murmured his mother's name, I think, and death came with it and closed his eyes.
It was a victory, yes, but it cost us dear. For that company's roll, when called at night, of 100 men who went into the fight, numbered but 20 that answered here. We will now have a tribute to honor all Piatt County men and women who have served in any capacity in the military of this great country. Piatt County men entered and fought in the Civil War. Shadrach Abbott and 2 others were killed in 1861. 60 men died in 1862. 61 men died in 1863. 61 men died in 1864. And 11 men died in 1865. 4 others died on dates unknown. Only 855 soldiers returned to their families. Roy William Ham, a member of Company M of the 130th Infantry, was killed in action on September 29, 1918. He was the first Monticello casualty of World War I. To honor Private Ham, the American Legion Post number 101 in Monticello changed its name to Roy Ham Post number 101. World War II, October 15, 1942. The USS Meredith was in the South Pacific and was struck by 14 bombs and 7 torpedoes. It rolled over and sank in 10 minutes. Only 8 officers and 73 enlisted men survived of a crew of 261. Robert Warner of Monticello died that day, and his grave is the Pacific Ocean. Private Wayne Bartley Jr., 18-year-old infantryman from Monticello, was killed in action September 5, 1951 in Korea. He was with Company E in the 2nd Battalion. He was the first man from Monticello killed in the Korean War. Robert Charles Burke, serving with Company I, 3rd Battalion, 27th Marines of the 1st Marine Division, was killed in action May 17, 1968, while on Operation Allen Brook in the hamlet of Linam, Gonai Island, southern Quang Nam Province. By his single-handed assault against North Vietnamese bunkers, he saved dozens of Marines. His heroic actions earned him the Medal of Honor. The medal and other artifacts are displayed in our courthouse. The Monticello American Legion then changed its name to the Ham Burke Post. Would all military personnel, past and present, please stand. That concludes our cemetery walk. We hope you enjoyed today's performance.